So, before we go any farther, I'll just let everybody there in the internet world know that I have to wash my flailing arms.
Sure.
That I did have dental surgery this morning, so if I sound like Marlon Brando in The Godfather, I apologize. But I'm sitting here with my new friend, Tiago Castro. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited because again, there's so many things that this we're at such a new stage of the channel, and I can kind of see a couple things that people might be interested in, other things I really don't have all the answers to. But you have a unique history, and something I really wanted to do was, and I'm going to call it humanize Alexander Howard Dumble, because there's so much myth around him, and so few people, I think, have any real experience with him. They read what they read in the forums, they know what they know from other players, but you have the unique and distinct experience of getting to know him.
Yeah.
So, and I'll never forget the first time that you and I talked about it. That's exactly what it did to me. Is it took me in, out of everything that I'd learned about him through, again, the gear page and all the other places, I didn't hear anything about him that was really human. And when you told me that he would call you if you were sick and that kind of stuff, I absolutely loved it. And it was a whole new thing for me. So that's kind of some of the stuff I'd like to dive into today, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, dude.
So how did you actually meet him? First time you met him?
Well, the first time I ever met Dumble in person, because I was talking to him over the phone a few times already. Yeah. But I'll never forget, well, first off, I used to work at Hollywood Vintage at the Hollywood Guitar Center,
Right.
From 01 to 2011.
Right.
So this happened sometime in 2001, maybe early 2002. And we were doing the releasing of the Fender hand-wired vibroverb with the Diaz mod.
Right.
So I believe Alex Diaz, son of Cesar Diaz, was there, and there were quite a few people, and Dumble showed up, but he showed up more towards the end of the presentation of the amp. And while they were finishing the presentation for the vibroverb, I was already getting some of the vintage guitars that were on stage and bringing them back to the vintage room. So I wasn't in a hurry, like around the store and running around with guitars in my hands. And I remember it was the last guitar I was moving to the vintage room. And it was a Gibson SG. I don't remember the year, but that's pointless also, because I was just bringing it back to the room. But anyway, when I was passing in front of the front door, he was coming in, and that was the first time he saw me.
Okay.
He didn't know that was me,
Right.
Because he probably didn't get to see my name on my name tag, because he was too kind of like far away from me. And what he did was he looked at me and said, "Oh man, that's really cool. Did you just sell that guitar? Congratulations."
Yeah.
And then I told him, "Oh no, I'm just bringing it back to the vintage room. I'll be right back at the event. I want to talk to you." And he said, "Okay, yeah, I'll be there." And so when I walked back to the pro audio room where they were having the event, he was talking to Drew Berlin. So I got there. So he said, "So you're the famous Mr. Castro," because he always called me Mr. Castro over the phone before. And so I shook hands with him. I got to meet him that day. And that was the very first experience I ever had in person with Dumble.
Really?
He didn't even know it was myself. And he was kind enough to congratulate me on something that he assumed that I did.
Yeah.
You know, he had no idea who that guy was walking with that guitar.
Right.
So that shows to you how much of a good human being he was.
Right. Which was immediately what I got from you when you told me that story.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the internet's so full of, I mean, there's haters and all kinds of stuff like that out there. And I've never subscribed to any of that stuff. I've always been the kind of person that's like, until I have an experience with that person, it's very much the same way I feel about politics, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But until I have an experience with that person, I won't formulate any opinions based on something somebody else said.
Yeah.
And I also had limited experience with his amplifiers. I think I've only played one or two until I moved here and got to know you and things of the sort. But, you know, not for anything. I think anybody who's ever played one of his amplifiers, I mean, and of course, you know, you have to insert that they're all, you know, tuned for specific players and whatnot.
Yes.
But there's really, and we're not talking about a 10% improvement here on something here. These things are exponentially different. And I guess that kind of adds to the lore. And then some of the photographs of him looks like he's a large man in stature. Was he very tall?
Yes, he was tall, and he was really overweight too.
Yeah.
But he was the kind of person that he was overweight and slow, but he was really strong.
Really? Yeah.
Really strong.
Yeah, country strong.
And I remember one time it really impressed me how strong he was, because we were at the vintage room. He used to go there all the time, you know. And at one point, he was there looking at a high power Fender Tweed Twin,
Right.
and those amps are heavy.
Yes, they are.
They're really heavy. You know, usually Tweed amps are not as heavy as Blackface because of the cabinetry and
Right. Yeah. Extra parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Twin, it was like a really heavy amp because it had like gigantic transformers in there.
Sure.
And I remember he's supposed to take a look at one there for one of his clients. So I removed the back panel for him. He kind of like bent down a little bit, you know, to look at the amp. And he said, well, let me grab it here. And he grabbed the amp and he flipped the amp, and he had the amp kind of like sideways, going that way,
Right.
you know, with the speakers towards that way and facing up.
Wow.
And the chassis facing down.
Right.
So he just flipped that amp the other way,
Yeah.
like if it was nothing, you know, and just put it on his lap. And he started looking at with this, now the speakers facing down and the circuit facing up. And he just looked at it, and he would lift the amp and look at the circuit.
Yeah.
You know,
Start diagnosis right there.
Yeah. So I was like, damn, this guy, he's strong. You know?
Yeah, the high power twin. You're absolutely right. As almost as bad as those Pole Brightmaster volume twins. It's like those things need pallbearers. They don't need musicians. You know, they're super heavy.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember Alexander always used to make fun of those high power twins until the time they changed the handles from leather, you know, to plastic.
Right.
Because he used to say, like, man, how could they even, like, that was like the only flaw Leo Fender had, like put like leather handles on high power twins. Okay. You know?
He again, like I said, he seemed like he was a really kind person from what you've told me, and the things that I like about that nowadays, especially, you know, based on everything the internet has told us, you know, because everyone gets this, you know, they get this image that he takes all your money and disappears and doesn't give you an amp, and then one day your amp is ready and you go pick it up, and it just blew my mind that you had that kind of experience with him, and to add to that, you know, as some of the the sonic characters that you've, been told, things that he's told you. And I mean, what kind of stuff would you say? Well, how about this? Why don't we talk about one of your amps? So now you have, remind me, is it 4?
Four
Amps that have his circuits in them.
Correct. Okay. Correct.
Which 3 of those 4 is your favorite? I know my favorite.
Yeah. Well, 3 of those he built for me, for myself.
Right.
And the 4th one I bought last year, and there's 14 months exactly ago, I bought the 4th one that he built for a friend of mine, someone I knew in Los Angeles, and I was able to buy the amp last year. I'll tell that on another story. But my favorite one, it's the Ultraphonics, which is like, out of everything I ever heard in my life, my all-time favorite amp.
Yeah.
Like including stuff that I've heard on records, amps that I've heard in person, other Dumbles. That one, he really hit a home run for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one that I like too. When you plugged me into that, I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely astounded.
Yeah, and it's something that, put it this way, before I met him in person, and before I heard his amps in person, people would talk about him a lot in the vintage room, because he was friends with everybody there, not only with the 2 managers, but with all the employees in the vintage room.
Right.
And people would brag about his stuff like nonstop there.
Right.
And I was like, well, whatever. I like my Vox and because I always had a trilogy, which was like JMI Vox amps, Tweed Fender stuff, and early Plexi amps.
Right.
Up to 67, 68. Those were my 3 favorite amps. Right. And I couldn't understand why someone wouldn't even like Dumble stuff.
Right.
And let alone brag about it the way they did.
Right.
But the first time I heard one in the room, it was like nothing I ever heard in my whole life.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing at all.
It was like, I think that the closest thing to the Dumble I've heard was like all the records that I like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, ooh, that sounds like what I hear on a lot of like great records.
Right.
And it did. And that literally changed my mind, like with a few seconds of someone playing that amp. And it blew me away.
Right.
And when he decided when he offered to make me one amp, and he said, well, I think you're really going to like this amp. And there's a whole story about it too. Why he did that amp for me and why we picked the Ultraphonics for him to do it first. And all I know is when I got the amp back, it was something that I couldn't believe it. Till today, I plug for that amp sometimes, and as soon as I'm ready to put the guitar down, it's like, holy shit, I've been playing for 3 hours. And me.
It's truly inspiring. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And I'm not even a good guitar player.
Oh, stop
that. But no, I'm not. And I'm realistic. And I'm not afraid of saying that.
I can understand why people say that, yeah.
But it's like, it's just like Dumble said. I'm making one amp that you're not going to feel like you're playing guitar. You're going to feel like you're enjoying life.
Right.
And as cheesy as it sounds, it's 100% true.
It's the way it should be, man. And I said actually on one of my little private lessons there that's I kind of gauge guitars the same way. Like if I start playing a guitar and it gives me something, then immediately that one's usually going home with me. Yeah. Now I've had guitars that spoke to me for a little while, and then they just stopped giving me something. I fell out of love with it. But yeah, there have been times I've plugged into something, especially that amp specifically, where it's just like, I mean, there's a level of intimidation that you've built in your own mind when you're plugging into one of those amps. And then after you get over that, then you start looking for that inspiration. And yeah, I could see completely getting lost in that. Yeah. Now, the story behind you getting your first one, if that's something you want to save for another time, I fully understand. But if there's any way of kind of like, did you have to go through the order form thing and all that stuff that people used to share on the forums and all that stuff?
No, not at all. It was actually funny because I became really good friends with Dumble right after I met him, because one thing that people don't know about him, it's that one of the reasons why people call him the tone chaperone, it's because he was a gear nerd.
Right.
He was more of a nerd than anyone else I ever seen my whole life.
Wow.
In terms of gear, and he would look for everything. He would, and probably that's why he figured out so much stuff that other people didn't, right. But anyway, so I would talk to him for hours and hours and hours a week over the phone, just like sharing gear experience.
Right.
Like one of the times that I remember that day we spent like almost 6 hours over the phone.
Really?
It was on my day off, and he called because he was curious about why some people call some JMPs Mark II and why some people don't.
Right.
So we started like digging into that. So he told me, oh, grab your Marshall book. So I grabbed mine, he grabbed his, and we were like discussing the Marshall book and the Marshall models over the phone, but each one with his book,
right.
Sitting down, just like that's the level of geekness that we had, so.
Which is refreshing, man.
Yeah. And so one day he walked in the room and I was listening to the Doyle Bramhall album, Welcome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, still one of my all-time favorite albums.
I think we talk about it every time we hang out, man.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I agree. Yeah. But go ahead.
And so Dumble stopped in the middle of the room. I was by myself there. So he stopped in the middle of the room, listened to what it was playing, and said, oh, this is Doyle Bramhall, right? I said, yeah. You know this album? He said, a little bit, with a smirk on his face. I'm like, well, tell me more. So he told me that he was friends with Doyle.
Yeah.
And so he asked me, well, do you like this album? And at the time, I know Dumble, it's like one of his two favorite guitar players were probably Stevie Ray and Hendrix.
Right.
The two biggest ones. And I told him, well, you might be mad at me for what I'm going to say to you right now, but that's what it is. I think that Doyle's tone on this album, even forget about how amazing his songwriting is, right. How amazing his vocals are, how amazing the whole band performance is on that album. I mean, Craig Ross, it's in it, and he's like on fire, So everything is awesome about this album, but Doyle's tone on that album, especially on the song "Cry," it's my all-time favorite guitar tone ever.
Right.
So when I told him that, he started laughing. And he said, well, I have no reason to be mad at you. I'm like, well, thank you.
Right.
May I ask you why?
Right.
And then he told me, well, because Doyle, I loaned him one amp that he used for that album, and more specifically for that song. So that was the first song that they tracked for the album. And Doyle used this particular amp, which is a personal dual showman that I have, that I did the ultraphonics mod,
Right.
which is and then he started getting into details of the ultraphonics.
Right.
And he said, well, but I'm glad that you like that.
Mm.
And that was like early 2000s, probably 2002, 2003.
It's around there.
And so after that, every time he would call the store, or every time he would call me at home, as soon as I would pick up the phone, first thing he would ask was, what's your favorite Strat tone? And I would have to tell him that. And it got to a point that I started joking with him.
Right.
You know, like coming up with different names and albums. And he would be surprised, like, well, I don't know that band. I would tell him, no, I'm just joking. You know, it's still like Doyle on that album.
That's an unbelievable record.
Oh, it's one of my all-time favorite ones.
I also think it came out at the right time. I think there was nothing around, nothing would even contend with that in that era. Nothing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the sounds on that record, you know, we've gone down that road, you know, in guitar hangs and stuff like that. Like, how close can we get to the Problem Child tone? And it just blows my mind. Almost every song on there sounds like the amp was inches away from death.
Oh yeah. And it's like, I think it was a very blessed time also for that band, because everything was perfect about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the drumming is just unbelievable.
JJ.
The bass playing, it's perfect. The backing vocals are like, you listen to that record. Every time I listen to that record, I get goosebumps on every song, from first to last.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's one of the few ones in that era that you can put on and walk away and pour yourself a drink and not have to worry about skipping a song that you're not a fan of. It's not something you're just going to put 2 or 3 songs into a playlist and walk away. Yeah, no,
that's what I call the perfect vinyl. You know, because you don't have to keep skipping songs. You put on the first one and goes all the way to the last on that side. Flip the vinyl, same thing.
Yeah, it's upstairs.
Well, you have it on vinyl, of course.
No, it's really, really good, man. So that was actually potentially one of his amps.
Yeah, that was the song "Cry" is that amp.
Is that one really?
Because it's the one that has the tremolo. And every other song on that album that has that kind of guitar tone, which is pretty much all of them, it's that amp. And what not many people know is that Craig Ross used a Vox AC30 and a Fender Bassman on that album.
Really? Well, the AC30 I can hear.
Yeah.
That's always been like that sound right there. That's an AC30, yeah.
But the Bassman was a Bassman head with an ultraphonics mod.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So you have like 2 guys using pretty much like Dumble amps, except for when Craig is using a Vox. But I remember the first time I spoke with you about that, and you tried the amp at my house, you noticed also the ultraphonics, as like most Dumble mods, the ultraphonics more, even so, it has a little bit of that Vox chime thing to it.
Yeah, the upper high end thing.
Yeah, it's almost like the best mixing between if you could like magically and perfectly mix a blackface Fender, an early super bass Marshall, and a Vox AC30, that would be pretty much an ultraphonics amp.
Really? Yeah.
And because the ultraphonics has all that.
I don't have a lot of experience with those early Marshalls personally.
Yeah.
But like every time I pull one up, even in we were talking off camera here about the plugins and stuff like that is kind of where I lean. And then being that I, have the Bassman, which is just over your shoulder in a shot, I do have a tendency to like that.
Yeah.
But there's always something to be said about taking those things 1 or 2 steps farther and having a different drive character and a different sound to it. And that was the thing I noticed the most with the Dumble amps. Now again, everyone kind of goes with they're so 3-dimensional, they're so this or so that, and all of that's very true. But to me, it was kind of where the mids were, where the upper mids were, and I stopped. I've always kind of said too about like, there was a point in time when I realized that I needed this pedal to do this and this pedal to do that. And then I realized I was playing pedals. I wasn't playing guitar anymore.
Yeah.
And that probably goes back to what you were saying that he used to say that about just having the right amp, so much so that you lose time. You end up in this like kind of time warp of good tone and inspiration. That's something I was after. And, when Tracy Farmer, who's a mutual friend of all of ours, when he had his at the last hang, that was that. I kind of looked at myself and I said, I got it, man. If I had the money to buy one, and I had security detail to go out with me night after night, sure, no problem. I'd have no problem doing it. They sound that good. They're that phenomenal.
Yeah, but that's the reason why people put out that kind of money for them.
Sure.
It's. Once you try one, and once you try one that kind of like fits your need, it's like you don't need anything else.
So do you still talk to Drew?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I've only spoken to him possibly twice. I might even be full of shit if I say twice. I think I was introduced to him once by Kirk Fletcher, and I think I might have talked to him a couple times online after that, but not somebody I know at all. But
what a great player also Kirk is.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Insane.
Yeah, Kirk, he's always got a special place in my heart.
It's funny because Kirk, he was introduced to me by Drew.
Yeah.
And he was also really good friends with Alexander. Alexander loved him.
Yeah. He hit the first hang. So Kirky and I were out in LA somewhere having breakfast, and we just had like one quick conversation at the start of the thing. And within seconds, he had already talked about Landau and Dumble. And I was just like, every once in a while, like the names these friends of mine every once in a while can just like, spout off. It's like, I've been stuck in my own little world over here. But yeah, great players, great people. Yeah. But I think Drew has the Ledger supposedly, right?
Correct.
So how many amps actually were made and branded Dumble? Is that an actual number?
Well, I never got to talk to Drew about that.
Yeah.
Because Drew has been extremely busy,
of course,
ever since Dumble's passing. I know that most everybody says that it was around something between 250 to 300.
Right, that's what I've heard.
Of his. Well, now I don't know. I would assume that that's like of his own models.
Right, the ones that actually say Dumble on them.
Yeah, the ones that he built like completely with the chassis, the Dumble branded ones.
Right.
Now the ones that he would modify, I don't know how many of those he made.
Of course.
And how they would add to the original ones numbers, but I would assume like from 250 to 300 of the original ones.
Right. Is there a model you like better than others? Or have you played all the models? How about that?
Not really.
Yeah.
But they're all incredible.
Right.
The Overdrive Special, it's still the most versatile.
Sure.
By far. But all the ones that he used to build, like the Small Special, which was like a simplified version, single channel of the Overdrive Special, incredible sounding amp. The Steel String Singer, incredible sounding amps. Yeah. I think everything he did, at least for who he did, it was perfect.
Right.
So for me, I don't think that I could pick one.
Right.
You know, again, I'm not a pro player, and I don't know if I would find one that would be no, actually I would find. I want to see something one that I think it's probably one of the best sounding amps I ever heard. Lowell George's amp.
Oh yeah, the one that Joe's got.
Yeah.
I know. I want to be actually in the room with it to experience it. I've heard the clips. Joe's told me that it's amazing.
Yeah. Just from hearing, I mean, when you listen to the all the stuff that amp it's in, right. That amp it's on, done by Little Feat.
Oh yeah.
You know, it sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, if you look at live videos of Lowell before and after,
oh yeah,
he sounded completely different.
Yeah, that live in Holland is Holland, isn't it? That,
I think it is.
Real big concert.
I think it is.
Yeah, it's like you can actually see the band's road cases behind him.
Yeah, they have like all the road cases on the back.
God, his sound was just unbelievable on that one. Yeah, and you can see the Dumble in almost every shot. Yeah,
and so even on the videos that Joe did, I get goosebumps just by listening to that. So I would imagine that being in the same room as someone playing that amp right, like Joe does,
right,
it would be like like seriously an experience that it's not human like, you know.
And that's the part of it that I love. I mean it. It's like there's like I said when we started, it's not just an extra couple of percent. This is like a major jump. It's like no. So and we should talk about this another time, but I'll just mention it briefly. When we put your La Tostada mod, sorry, the tongue is still. Let's have dental surgery and have your buddy over and do a podcast. But when we put that next to my basement, it was like I loved my basement, and then I went, it's still not all the way there. Still a good sounding basement. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But man, just we're talking, they're completely different amps, even though they're not.
The level of fidelity, of high fidelity that the Dumble stuff has, it's undescribable.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so that's kind of my goal, and we've talked about this a little bit, but eventually I want to just get some studio time going and get a relatively small camera crew and a good engineer and like just put two of them kind of on record. No instruments around them, no nothing. Just like here's like literally the sound of that amp, and then get your baseline comparisons and stuff like that. The ultraphonics blows me away every time you've had me plug into that. And I think that there's something to be said about, dispelling the myth. Wow, man, some words are just not there right now. And I'd like to do that eventually when we get some, time that works out and stuff like that in the studio.
Yeah, absolutely.
But why don't we talk just a little bit about you? Because you're also an internet myth. You're another one that
I wish.
Yeah, no. It's amazing the people that do know you, and I've said that before. It's like every once in a while I'll be like, my buddy Thiago, and they're like, I know Thiago. Yeah. And then I'll be talking to somebody else who I would think that and they're like, I've only read about him in forums and stuff like that. And it's kind of cool. It's like, this guy's just as mysterious, and thankfully he's my friend. So you're originally from Brazil, which is probably something we should have said a long time ago. And the first time you came to America was when?
Was in 1998.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I moved to Los Angeles, and I moved there to do recording at Musicians Institute.
Right.
Yeah.
MIT.
And it was, an MI.
Oh, MI. Sorry.
And
GIT and MI did a thing there.
Yeah, and I did the RIT, Recording Institute of Technology.
Oh,
that was the program, right? RIT.
So, would you actually call yourself an engineer still?
Oh yeah, I mean,
because I have a friend who like completely fell out of love with it. He's like, technology's past him now, and he doesn't want.
Oh no, not at all. Okay, not at all. That one of the reasons why I got involved with recording was because back in the day, even before I moved to the U.S., the city I was doing college in Brazil, there were no recording studios there. And at the time, we had like a cover band that used to play like really heavy stuff. And there were a lot of great heavy bands in the area.
Right.
But there were nowhere to record. So I started trying to not only help them, but help my band also to get some songs recorded. But all I had was a Tascam that we would be able to borrow sometimes, you know. And it was like one of those cassette tapes with a four tracks. And boy, that was hard.
Yeah.
You know, to work with people around that. And so a little bit after I moved to the capital of my state, and I was helping some people in studios there, you know, and mostly with rock bands also, you know, like typical bands nobody wanted to work with. Because I grew up listening to rock music, punk rock. I love punk rock to today.
Right.
And that was what I was doing most in Brazil. So I decided to go to Los Angeles and do school there.
Right.
And my plans were to move back to Brazil right after, but I ended up staying a little bit longer, and I got a working permit, and I kept extending my stay, and here I am still today, you know. But it was pretty much that, you know. I started doing because it was involving with music, and I fell in love with recording, you know, and I love it too today. The only reason why I got out was because I think I got fed up with more with the industry than with and not the recording industry in itself, but
the record industry.
And now I think it was just because it was so hard to make money on it, you know, because I had a studio that was quite well equipped. It had an API console. It had a lot of great old compressors, a lot of great outboard gear. I had like 12 channels of like old Neve stuff.
Wow.
And it was really hard to see like bands that I liked, that I could see maybe someday like being good, struggling to pay.
Right.
You know, and
ain't gotta tell me.
and it was not like a bad thing. I wouldn't see that. I wouldn't say it was like the band. I was mad at the band's not paying me.
Right.
You know, what I couldn't see was a future for me if the bands were like struggling so much, you know, to come up with money for me to stay in business, rely on them, it would be kind of like hard. Then, right when I was starting to change my mind about that, the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, I didn't get a break on the studio rental.
Right.
I didn't get a break on utilities. I didn't get a break at all on security for the studio. Internet access, I didn't get a break. I didn't get like a penny break.
Right.
But I was making zero money at the time. Right. I never got a stimulus check.
Right.
You know, and so it was like, at that point, I said, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm good. I've recorded a lot of people that I liked. You know, I wish them all the best. But I need to make money.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I quit recording. But that's what I'm actually am, a recording engineer.
Yeah. Okay. So this is you kind of leaving that industry wasn't that long ago at all. For some reason, I always thought it was a lot longer ago.
No.
Okay,
it was in 2020.
Right.
When I decided. Right after the pandemic started.
Okay. Man, you know, there's something to be said about what the pandemic did at that time. It's so easy to just kind of fall into mopiness, and I reinvented myself lost track of time. I mean, the next time I get interviewed when this next record comes out, it'll be like, wow, like 4 years passed and I wasn't even paying attention. But I felt very much like you. I got a stimulus check and I got all that stuff, but I got bills like everybody else, and that was the first time I was on unemployment, and the unemployment thing was oh man, in New York State, I think I was getting a check for $600 a week. It was like, dude, I pay myself way more than this, you know, and it was something to be thankful for, but I had racked up $40,000 in bills on the last record. And so I couldn't see doing things the way that they were at that time. And I would have loved to jump back into playing, but I was watching what some of the guys were going through, and I was just like, I'm not interested in that. So that's when I reinvented myself. But I would never go, you know, off the deep end and call myself an engineer. I think that that's something that's a title that you've earned through school and stuff like that. And it's something that I can do through trial and error, and a lot of it's done when no one's looking, which is why I was preparing all of this before you got here. You know,
well, but you know what? Truth be told, once I left school in Los Angeles, I got a few jobs there as an engineer, and of course you learn every day, you know. But once I got the job at Guitar Center, I was Guitar Center full time.
Right.
You know, so I kind of like stopped doing recording for a little while. I was doing it at home, you know, but like really small stuff and only my own things else. Rarely I would do anything else outside that. But my goal also was to save enough money to put together a cool studio and have the studio in LA. Open a studio in LA. Ended up moving to Brazil in 2011, and the studio that I was going to open in LA, I ended up opening in Brazil. And boy, that's when I really started learning.
Right.
You know, because I moved back to Brazil with a lot of gear for the studio. There were people there that could do the studio for me, but I could either pay them, let's say, just for, if I would have just buy the acoustic foam for the studio. In Brazil, it was about, in the Brazilian currency, it was about $10,000 if I would have just buy all the foam for the acoustic treatment. And if I would have fly to the US, buy the foam here, and bring it back with me to Brazil, I would have paid like $1,400.
I hate that for you, man.
So,
and everybody there.
Yeah, and it's like, so for everything, cabling and everything I needed for the studio, I had to fly here, fly back, buy the stuff, fly back there, and I had to learn how to install everything.
Yeah.
Like, I had never did cabling for a studio before. Literally moving cables from one room to another, and optimizing cabling the control room. So I had to learn how to do all that myself. And that's when you really start learning, because everything in terms of like a recording, like most everything you do, it's signal routing based.
Right.
You know, so if you learn well the signal routing on the studio, and if you learn well everything you have in the studio to work with, sessions are so much better.
Yeah.
But so much better, you know, because it flows faster. People get results faster, you know. So that's when I really start learning.
Yeah.
And of course, the studio was at my house, you know, so bands would leave for the day. What was I doing? oh, let's try out more stuff. Like, let's experiment with more stuff. Let me try this instead of that.
Right.
You know, and so that's when you learn a lot.
Really?
Most of everything that I've learned. Yeah, and then I moved to Nashville in 2019 and opened a studio in Bear Hill, and with all the gear that I had. And then I learned how to I started learning how some people here deal with tones and sound.
Right.
And then I realized that me and all the geekiness that I had with Alexander Dumble about amps was nothing compared to what some people in the audio world does.
Yeah, really.
You know, it was like people would do like hours and hours and hours of listening to sounds recorded through a let's say an API mic pre, you know, one that had like a cap that was one type of cap, the other one another type of cap. I mean, that thing has probably like hundreds of cap,
right?
And they were comparing one cap only
Wow.
of one type to the other, and you would sit down for half hour and they would be like analyzing that sound, and you're like, I can't hear nothing of that.
Yeah.
You know, and then of course everything is training, and once you start learning how to pick up those subtle nuances, you know, then you're like, oh wow, now I hear it.
It's funny. I just said that too about the new Les Paul that I got. It's like I've played I think between 6 and 8, 58 to 60 bursts.
Yeah.
But they're so far apart. I'll play one, don't play another for 8 months, play another one.
Yeah.
Sometimes one's more memorable than the other. So it's hard without things being side by side.
Yeah.
And which is kind of the benefit of hanging out the way that we do. And, we got together a couple of months ago and got 3 original clones together and then a clone. And it's like sometimes it's nice when they're all in one room. And
that's the only way you can do it.
But I'd be completely guilty of, like, I don't know, it's been a long time. It's like, I recognize it, but doesn't mean, it's going to speak to me without having one guitar to another. Yeah. And when I was at the guitar at Carter's last week buying that guitar, I literally wouldn't even move my position. I would just hand a guitar to the salesman and just be like, just real quick, I'd leave the knobs in the same spot. Yeah. And so I get some of that. There's a real advantage to us living here.
Oh yeah.
For that, because we have the luxury of doing that. And for me, the friends that I've made, yourself included, have taken my knowledge to the next level. And it's humbling a lot of times. It's intimidating a lot of times. And I'm really, really grateful for the amount of ground that I've covered in the year that I've been here. But there's not a day that goes by that I don't think I should have done it sooner. Yeah. Me personally, and to go back to the amplifier thing, it's like I've spent so much, countless thousands of dollars tone chasing. And there were periods, we can call them spells of my life, where all I played was this, all I played was Marshalls, all I played was Soldanos, back on Fenders, back on, Marshalls again. And I would just go back and forth. And then I learned to keep basically like one of everything. So when I was in that fickle stage, but then, the times that I've been, over your house and plugged into a Dumble or something else that you've handed me, it's been like I said, it's humbling, it's intimidating, and it definitely, you leave there with another knowledge of knowing how to treat the gear that you have to get it a little closer to that sound. But same goes for this record that we made. That I thought I came to the table with all this stuff and all these, a couple different amps and a couple different guitars, a couple different pedals, and sometimes it's just the right amp at the right volume, the right microphones. And that goes back to what you're saying too about being an engineer. That's why I'm just so grateful for people around here that are in the industry and that are rallying behind me and giving me opportunities to learn things. So good opportunity to say thank you on camera, man.
Yeah. Well, and it's that kind of thing also. It's the journey.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so you have to have fun.
Which is what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe even too much sometimes.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
No. I was telling Luke and Clay this. I'm like, man, it's like we're bad enablers. Yeah. Like, come over and try this. Now, don't try not to buy one for yourself. You know.
Yeah. But it's always so fun. I mean, every time we get to those hangs, you know, it's like from the moment that we get together. To the time that we leave, that we split apart, it's just pure fun.
Yeah.
You know?
I guess we should just kind of outline what that is. So we call them hangs. I don't really know what it is, but, you know, we just get together usually on a Saturday. Yeah. And it has been as much as 8 hours, and it's been longer than that. Just a couple of guys hanging around, vintage gear, really good, you know, high-end boutique gear. Yeah. Guys with a great, you know, sense of, I mean, just like having good taste and all that stuff, and really learning our way around, you know, the gear. And I've been so grateful for it. They don't happen often enough for me.
Oh no, and the best thing, it's like, you have all the gear that it's unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. You know. And the gear is still not even close to how great the people there are.
Oh, completely agree.
So it's like it's hard to explain.
We've got a good group of guys here, man. Yeah, we do, and I'm going to include myself in it too, because I've been misunderstood almost my entire life, and it's nice to know that I got guys that, much like we were saying at the beginning, and this is a great way to close, that. You know, sometimes the people you read about on the internet, they're not the person you're reading about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're humanized, you know, through those moments. And I'm excited that, you know, to hear that, you know, from you specifically, that Dumble is a great guy.
Oh yeah.
And hopefully he'll come back and tell us more stories. I'm excited to know that the people that we hang around with are all great guys, and that we are geeky, and you know, we're not, you know, sniffing batteries just yet. You know,
well, that could be on the next hand.
But we've uncovered some. I think we've uncovered some, you know, some truths and dispelled some myths, and I've been excited to know. I mean, a lot of times I don't like facing the truth of, great, the $3,000 version definitely beats the $1,000 or the $500 version. But, you know, the ultimate quest for guitar amp tone, you know, was right there with the amps that you got, man, and they sound great. And I appreciate the fact that you've offered, you know, not only your time in this today and your friendship, but I think we should definitely document at this point the actual sound of those amps. And and knowing again that I have an engineer sitting across from me.
Well, there you go.
And we'll get somebody, you know, to push buttons, and we'll just document at least the ultraphonics, because
I think it's magical.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. And so thanks again for being here, man. I have no idea what time it is. I didn't even wear my watch.
Oh, dude, it's probably, well, judging by the fun, it's probably a long time already. You know, because you never see time flying, you know, when you're having fun.
Yeah. So we're going to go grab lunch. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you. Thank you
so much for having me in. Always.
And we're going to go have lunch, and then I'll get around to editing these videos, which you guys don't need to know. But if anybody wants any information about myself or Thiago, we're both on Instagram. Yep. You can follow us. I'll put a link to his page. You can follow him.
Thank you.
And then we'll gladly have you back. I'd love it if you were regular. Absolutely, man.
Well, maybe someday.
Maybe.